The fork freezes halfway to his mouth. It's a beautiful fork, heavy and silver, loaded with a perfectly seared scallop. A moment ago, Mark was the king of this room, the center of this universe. His voice, a confident baritone, had been weaving a spell over his investors, a story of profit margins and bold futures. Now, that voice is gone, trapped in his throat. His face, usually tanned and animated, has turned the color of ash. His eyes, the ones that used to look at me like I was the only thing holding the world together, are wide with a specific kind of horror. It's the horror of a man who has just realized the ground beneath his feet was never solid. It was a trapdoor, and I am the one holding the lever. The conversation at the table sputters and dies. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of expensive wine being praised, it all fades into a thick, ringing silence. All 8 of his guests, the men he's been courting for months, are staring at him. They see what I see, the mask of the powerful CEO slipping, revealing the panicked, cornered animal underneath. His phone lies face up on the white linen tablecloth, its screen glowing with a notification that has just detonated our lives. My phone is in my hand, resting in my lap, cool and heavy. The weapon. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my Chardonnay. The wine is crisp and cold, a perfect counterpoint to the fire I can feel building behind my ribs. Mark's eyes finally tear away from his screen and lock with mine. There is no love there, no pleading, not even simple anger. There is only a dawning, terrifying understanding. He thought he was playing a game. He's only just realized I was the one who wrote the rules. The silence in that room was louder than a scream. It was the sound of a life cracking down the middle. If you've ever felt that kind of quiet power, that moment when the world shifts on its axis, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, please subscribe. It means more than you know to have you with me on this journey. It wasn't always like this. It wasn't always a silent war waged across a table of oblivious investors. Before the silence, there was music. There was the sound of Mark's laughter echoing across the water at our Lakehouse. That house. It was more than wood and glass. It was my heart, given a physical form. The land had been in my family for generations, a wild, untouched piece of shoreline my grandfather had bought with his first real paycheck. He'd always dreamed of building a cabin there, a place for the family to gather. He never got the chance. When he passed, he left the deed to me, his only granddaughter. It was a sacred trust. For years, the land sat, waiting for me. When I met Mark, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. He was a builder, not just of buildings but of dreams. He was ambitious, charming, with a blueprint for the future sketched out behind his eyes. When I showed him the land, he saw what I saw. Not just pine trees and a rocky shore, but a sanctuary. "We'll build our life here, Alara," he'd said, his arm around my waist, the scent of pine needles sharp in the cool air. "A place no one can touch." And we did. He was a developer, and he poured all his professional expertise into it. But I was the architect of its soul. I chose every finish, every color, every window placement to maximize the view of the sunset over the water. I spent months sourcing the reclaimed barnwood for the great room floor. I designed the stone fireplace myself, sketching it on napkins until it was perfect, big enough to warm us on the coldest winter nights. It was my project, my inheritance, my dream. He funded it, calling it his wedding gift to me, a grand gesture that made all our friends sigh with envy. The structure was his, but the home, the very essence of it, was mine. The deed to the land remained solely in my name, a detail that seemed insignificant at the time, a formality my lawyer insisted upon that Mark had laughed off. "It's your land, your legacy," he'd said with a magnanimous wave of his hand. "I'm just building our castle on it." For 15 years, that castle was our haven. We spent every possible weekend there. I remember the smell of coffee brewing in the early morning light, the sound of the loons calling across the misty water. I remember long, lazy afternoons on the dock, my feet dangling in the cool water, a book in my lap, Mark tinkering with his boat nearby. We hosted barbecues for friends, our laughter mixing with the sizzle of the grill. We watched thunderstorms roll in from the screened-in porch, feeling safe and untouchable as the world raged outside. He would hold me and whisper, "This is it, Ilara. This is forever." I believed him. I wrapped myself in that belief like a warm blanket. It was a beautiful life, a perfect life. And like all perfect things, it was a fragile illusion, waiting for the first crack to appear. The crack started small. So small I almost missed it. It was a shift in the air, a change in the pressure of our home. It began with the late nights. Mark, who had always made a point of being home for dinner, started staying at the office until 10, then 11. "This new project is a monster, Elle," he'd say, kissing my forehead as he slipped into bed, smelling of stale office air and something else I couldn't quite place. I accepted it. He was ambitious. I'd always loved that about him. I would leave a plate of food for him in the oven, a little note beside it. I was the supportive wife. That was my role. Then came the phone. His phone, which used to be left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always with him, screen down. It was glued to his hand, a third appendage. It would buzz at all hours, and he'd give a start, glancing at it with an urgency that felt private. If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd angle the screen away, a quick, furtive movement that felt like a flinch. "Just the office," he'd mutter, his thumbs still flying. "You know how Henderson gets." I did know Henderson. Henderson went home to his wife and kids at 5 o'clock sharp every day. But I didn't say that. I just nodded, a nod of something cold and unfamiliar tightening in my stomach. I was the trusting wife. That was my role. The distance grew, a silent, creeping frost. Our conversations became transactional, about schedules and bills, not dreams and feelings. The easy intimacy we'd shared, the shorthand of a long marriage, was replaced by a careful, formal politeness. He stopped touching me as much. A perfunctory kiss on the cheek in the morning, a distant pat on the shoulder at night. I tried to bridge the gap. I'd plan date nights, buy new lingerie, suggest a weekend away at the Lakehouse. He was always too busy, too tired, too stressed. "Next month, Ilara, I promise," he'd say, his eyes already drifting back to the glow of his phone. "Once this deal closes, everything will go back to normal." I clung to that promise. Normal. I craved normal. I told myself this was just a phase, a rough patch that all long marriages go through. I blamed his work, the pressure, the economy. I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't being exciting enough, supportive enough, understanding enough. I tried harder. I read books on how to be a better partner. I cooked his favorite meals. I didn't complain. I made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, hoping to create a space so peaceful he couldn't help but return to it, to me. But the space just grew wider, colder. I was living with a stranger, a polite roommate who paid half the bills and slept on his side of our king-sized bed, a canyon of empty sheets between us. The supportive, trusting wife was starting to feel like a fool. And the fool was starting to get scared. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a piece of paper. A credit card statement, thin and unassuming, left on the kitchen island. I was paying the bills, a task I'd taken over years ago. My eyes scanned the columns of familiar charges: groceries, gas, the dry cleaner, our favorite Italian restaurant. And then a name I didn't recognize.
Fleur de Nuit à Lingerie Boutique Downtown.
The expensive kind, the kind with silk and lace that costs a fortune. The charge was for over $800. I frowned. My birthday had been 2 months ago. Christmas was months away. I hadn't received any gifts from him. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through me. I walked to our closet, to my lingerie drawer. I knew every piece I owned. Nothing new. Nothing from Fleur de Nuit. My hands started to shake. It's a mistake, I told myself. A fraudulent charge. I should call the credit card company. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the name on the paper, my heart hammering against my ribs. There had to be an explanation. A gift for his sister? Her birthday wasn't for months. A gift for his mother? The thought was absurd. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the statement crinkling in my fist. This was the first piece of concrete evidence, the first tangible thing I could hold in my hands that told me the paranoia wasn't just in my head. The ground beneath my feet, which had felt unsteady for months, now felt like it was actively crumbling. I didn't confront him. What would I say? Who did you buy $800 worth of lingerie for? He would have an answer. He always had an answer. A brilliant, plausible lie that would make me feel crazy and ashamed for even asking. He was a master of that. He could twist reality until I no longer trusted my own perceptions. So I said nothing. I put the statement back on the pile and paid the bill. But something inside me had shifted. The role of the trusting wife was over. A new role was emerging, one I didn't recognize, one that felt cold and watchful. The detective. My investigation started online. It felt pathetic, cliché. The scorned wife, hunched over her laptop late at night, typing his name into social media search bars. I scrolled through endless photos of our friends, of business events, of charity galas. There we were, the happy couple, smiling for the camera. Mark's arm was always around me, a proprietary grip. It looked like love. Now it looked like a performance. I found nothing. His own profiles were locked down, professional. Of course they were. He was careful. But then a stroke of luck. A tagged photo. A group shot from a happy hour I hadn't known about. It was posted by a young marketing assistant at his firm. There was Mark in the background, laughing, a drink in his hand. And standing a little too close to him, her head tilted towards his in a way that was both intimate and proprietary, was a young woman. She was beautiful, in that effortless way 20-somethings are. Long, dark hair, bright eyes, a confident smile. I clicked on her profile. It was public. Her name was Chloe. Chloe from marketing. I fell down the rabbit hole. Her feed was a curated collection of a life I didn't recognize, but one that orbited my own. Pictures of cocktails at the bar near Mark's office. A shot of the sunset from a viewpoint I knew was just down the road from our Lakehouse. A selfie where she was wearing a cashmere scarf that looked identical to one I'd bought for Mark last Christmas. Each photo was a small, sharp sting. It was circumstantial, I told myself. It could all be a coincidence. But the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. This was her. This was the woman who was receiving $800 lingerie. This was the reason my husband had become a stranger. The final, undeniable proof came in a way that was almost poetic in its cruelty. I decided on a whim to drive up to the Lakehouse.
It was a Tuesday.
Mark had told me he was in back-to-back meetings all day. I just needed to be there, to breathe the pine-scented air, to feel the solid wood of the porch under my feet. I needed to reconnect with the one place that still felt like mine. I drove the 2 hours with the windows down, music playing, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting, that I would get there and feel silly for my suspicions. I pulled into the long, gravel driveway, and my heart stopped. His car was there. The sleek, black sedan he was so proud of. Confusion warred with a surge of panic. He was supposed to be in meetings. Why was he here? Maybe he'd had a cancellation. Maybe he'd come up for the same reason I had, to find some peace. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe we could talk. I got out of my car, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. The house was quiet. I walked up the stone path to the front porch. And then I saw them. 2 wine glasses on the small table between the rocking chairs. One had a faint lipstick stain on the rim. It wasn't my shade. Draped over the back of one of the chairs was a woman's sweater, a soft, pink thing. It wasn't my sweater. I stood there, frozen, staring at these 2 simple objects. They were an alien presence in my sanctuary. They were a declaration of war. I could hear faint music coming from inside the house. A soft, slow melody I didn't recognize. I could have walked in. I could have thrown open the door and confronted them. The thought made my stomach heave. I couldn't. Not yet. I was a coward. I backed away slowly, carefully, as if I were retreating from the scene of a crime. I got in my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I drove away. The image of those 2 wine glasses burned into my mind. My sanctuary had been invaded. My home had been defiled. And the woman inside, I knew with a sickening certainty, was Chloe from marketing. The war had begun, and I hadn't even known I was a soldier. The days that followed were a blur of hollowed-out numbness. I moved through my life like a ghost, performing the mundane tasks of existence on autopilot. I made coffee. I answered emails. I smiled at the checkout girl at the grocery store. But inside, I was screaming. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I would look at Mark across the dinner table as he talked about his day, his face animated, his lies so smooth and practiced, and I would feel a wave of nausea. I was living with a stranger who wore my husband's face. I tried to confront him, but my attempts were weak, pathetic. I didn't have the courage for a direct accusation. Instead, I circled the truth, poking at it with timid questions. "You seem so stressed, Mark. Are you sure everything's okay at work?" I'd ask, my voice trembling slightly. He would look up from his phone, his expression one of weary patience. "Alara, we've talked about this. It's the Henderson deal. It's massive. I need your support right now, not this insecurity." It's not attractive, the word insecurity landed like a slap. He was twisting it, making my valid pain into a character flaw. He was gaslighting me, and he was so damn good at it. Another time, I tried a different approach. "I was thinking of driving up to the Lakehouse this weekend," I said, trying to sound casual. "The garden needs some attention." He didn't even look up.
Can't.
"I need it for a work retreat. I'm taking some of the junior associates up to brainstorm. We need a change of scenery to get the creative juices flowing." My blood ran cold. The junior associates.
Chloe.
He was taking her to our house, our bed. "Oh," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Okay." I felt small and powerless, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Every attempt I made to find solid ground, he kicked the dirt out from under me. I was starting to question my own sanity. Was I imagining all of it? Was I the crazy, paranoid wife he was making me out to be? The self-doubt was a poison, seeping into every corner of my mind. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every furtive glance, every flimsy excuse. I lost weight. My friends started to notice. "Are you okay, Alara?" My best friend, Sarah, asked over coffee. "You look exhausted." I wanted to tell her everything, to pour out the whole sordid, painful story. But the shame held me back. Admitting my husband was cheating felt like admitting I had failed, that I wasn't enough. So I just smiled a weak, watery smile. "Just stress," I'd say. "Mark's big deal, you know, I was protecting him. Even now, even as he was systematically destroying me, I was still protecting his reputation, our image." The habit of being the supportive wife was a hard one to break. The turning point from passive grief to active investigation came from an unexpected place: anger. It started as a low simmer and then boiled over one evening. He came home late, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. He dropped his briefcase by the door and announced he was going to the Lakehouse for the long weekend. "Just me," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I need to clear my head. Decompress before the final push on the Henderson deal." The lie was so blatant, so insulting to my intelligence, that something inside me snapped. The sadness and the fear were burned away by a sudden, white-hot rage. I watched him pack a bag, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. He was going to spend the weekend with her in my bed in my house, and he was whistling. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I went to my laptop. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to find the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I searched for private investigators in my city. I spent an hour reading reviews, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I chose one with a discreet downtown office and stellar recommendations for marital infidelity cases. I called and made an appointment for the next morning. It was the first proactive step I had taken in months. It was the first time I felt a flicker of power in a situation that had left me utterly powerless. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew I couldn't live in the fog of lies and self-doubt any longer. I needed proof. I needed the truth to be a weapon I could finally wield. The private investigator's office was sterile and impersonal, all gray carpets and cheap art. The man himself, Mr. Davies, was the opposite. He was kind, with sad, knowing eyes that had seen this story play out 1,000 times before. He listened patiently as I stumbled through my story, my voice cracking as I spoke the suspicions out loud for the first time. I felt pathetic, another cliché wife in a long line of them. But he didn't judge. He just nodded, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "The Lakehouse," he said, his voice gentle. "That's the key. People get careless when they feel safe, when they're in their own little world." He promised to be discreet. He told me he would have a preliminary report for me in 72 hours. I wrote him a check, my hand surprisingly steady. Walking out of that office, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I had outsourced my pain to a professional. The burden was no longer mine alone to carry. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I jumped every time the phone rang. I barely ate. I just waited. On the third day, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: report. I stared at it for a full minute, my cursor hovering over the message, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Taking a deep breath, I clicked it open. The report was a PDF file. It was clinical, detached, and utterly devastating. It was a timeline of my husband's weekend. My husband's weekend with Chloe. There were pictures. Grainy, long-lens photos that felt like a violation of a violation. The first one showed Mark's car pulling into the Lakehouse driveway. A few minutes later, another car, a small red convertible, pulled in behind it.
Chloe.
There were pictures of them on the dock, drinking wine. A picture of them kissing, his hands tangled in her long, dark hair. A picture of them laughing as they got into his boat. But the worst one, the one that made me gasp and drop my phone on the floor, was taken through the great room window at night. They were standing in front of the fireplace, my fireplace. Chloe was wearing one of my favorite silk robes, the one I always left hanging on the back of the master bedroom door. She was in his arms, her head thrown back in laughter. They were in my home, wearing my clothes, living a grotesque parody of my life. I sat on the floor for a long time, the images burning in my mind. The grief was back, a tidal wave of it, so powerful it threatened to drown me. But underneath the grief, something else was stirring. The rage I had felt before was now colder, harder, sharper. It was crystallizing into something else. Purpose. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had desecrated our sanctuary. He had taken the most sacred thing we had, the physical manifestation of our life together, and he had defiled it with his lies and his mistress. He had spit on 15 years of my love, my support, my life. And he had done it with a smile on his face, whistling a happy tune. The insult was breathtaking in its arrogance. It wasn't just an affair, it was an erasure. He was trying to replace me, piece by piece, in the life I had helped him build. He brought her into our world, parading her around like a new acquisition. He even started talking about her at home, a new level of audacity that left me speechless. "You know, Chloe from marketing is a real genius," he said one night over dinner, swirling his wine. "She has this incredible vision for the Henderson project. So fresh. So hungry." He looked at me, a challenge in his eyes, daring me to react. I just picked at my salad, my stomach churning. He was testing me, pushing the boundaries to see what he could get away with. He wanted to normalize her presence, to weave her into the fabric of our lives until I had no choice but to accept it. The final straw, the move that pushed me from planning a confrontation to planning a war, came a week later. He called me from the office, his voice slick with false enthusiasm. "Honey, great news. I've got to take the team up to the Lakehouse for a strategy session this weekend. A full-on work retreat. I was thinking of having Chloe stay at the house with me. She's the project lead, and we need to be in constant communication. She can take the guest room, of course. Is that okay with you? I held the phone to my ear, the silence stretching. Is that okay with you? The question was a mockery. He wasn't asking for permission. He was informing me of his decision. He was going to move his mistress into our home, under the guise of work, and he expected me to smile and nod like the good, supportive wife. He was so confident in his power over me, so certain of my weakness, that he believed I would swallow this ultimate humiliation without a fight. In that moment, something inside me broke. But it didn't collapse into despair. It broke open, and what emerged was a woman he would not recognize. A woman who was done crying. A woman who was ready to burn his world to the ground. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Whatever you need for the project to succeed. I support you completely." I hung up the phone. The game had changed. He thought he was in control. He had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire rulebook. My first call wasn't to a friend or a family member. It was to a divorce lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best, most ruthless one in the city. Her name was Victoria Sterling, and her reputation preceded her. She was known for dismantling the egos of powerful men and securing settlements that were the stuff of legend. Our meeting was in her corner office, overlooking the entire city. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of calm, lethal competence. I told her everything. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts, the timeline, the lies, the emotional toll, with a cold precision that surprised even myself. I showed her the private investigator's report. She scanned the photos, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair, tapping a long, manicured finger on her desk. "This is a standard, sordid affair, Mrs. Collins," she said, her voice crisp. "He's arrogant and he's careless. We can secure you a very generous settlement. The house in the city, alimony, half of his assets." "It's not about the money," I said, my voice low. "It's about the Lakehouse." I explained its history, the land from my grandfather, the way it was built, the way it was my soul. "He's taken it from me. He's living there with her. I want it back." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Assets acquired during the marriage are typically considered marital property, regardless of whose name is on what. He paid for the construction. He'll argue his investment gives him a significant stake. It will be a fight. A knot of despair tightened in my chest. But the land was mine before we even met. The deed was transferred to me from my grandfather's estate. This seemed to pique her interest. "Let's see the paperwork," she said. I had brought everything. A thick file folder containing the original deed for the land, the property tax records, the architectural plans I had drawn myself. She spent 20 minutes poring over the documents, her silence filling the room. I held my breath, my entire future seeming to hang in the balance. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that looked like a predatory smile on her lips. "Well, Mr. Collins is either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Or perhaps both." She slid a document across the desk towards me. It was the original deed, in my name, Alara Jane Prescott. My maiden name. "The land is yours," unequivocally. "It's an inherited asset, and you never commingled it by putting his name on the deed." "But the house," I said. "He paid for it." "He did," she confirmed. "As a gift. A very, very expensive gift. But he made a critical error. In his rush to play the grand, generous husband, he never had a post-nuptial agreement drawn up to secure his investment in the property. He never had the structure legally tied to his name or his business as a distinct asset. He built his castle, as you said, on your land. Legally." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "The castle belongs to the owner of the land. The entire property, land and structure, is yours, Alara. Solely and completely yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, unable to process it.
Meaning?
It was all mine. The sanctuary he had violated, the home he had taken over, he had no legal right to it whatsoever. He was a guest who had massively overstayed his welcome. A wave of dizziness washed over me, followed by a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my hands shake. The tears I had been holding back for months finally came, but they weren't tears of sadness or grief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The power dynamic had just shifted, seismically. I wasn't the victim begging for scraps from the table. I was the queen of the castle, and I was about to evict the usurper. The feeling was terrifying, and it was glorious. I had my weapon, and it was a big one. Mark, oblivious to the storm gathering on his horizon, grew bolder. He became a different person, or perhaps the person he had always been, now unmasked. The quiet, watchful Alara seemed to unnerve him. My lack of emotional outbursts, my calm demeanor, it wasn't the reaction he expected from a scorned wife. He had anticipated tears, screaming matches, drama. My silence was a void he didn't know how to navigate, and it made him lash out. He started a campaign of psychological warfare designed to break me down, to make me into the hysterical woman he could then justifiably leave. He began to subtly rewrite our history to our friends. Alara's been so distant lately, he'd say over dinner with another couple, his voice laced with false concern, his hand resting on my knee in a show of solidarity. I think the stress of my work is getting to her. She's not herself. He was laying the groundwork, painting me as unstable, preparing their sympathies for his eventual departure. Some of our friends bought it, looking at me with pity, offering platitudes about self-care and therapy. It was isolating, a slow and deliberate poisoning of the well of my support system. The financial pressure started next. He began moving large sums of money out of our joint savings account, claiming they were necessary cash infusions for his business before the big deal closed. When I questioned a $50,000 transfer, he flew into a rage. "Are you my wife or my accountant, Alara? This is what it takes to operate at this level. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? This is for us. For our future." He made me feel small and ignorant, as if my questions were an attack on his competency. I knew he was hiding money, preparing for the divorce he thought he would be the one to initiate, but I had no way to prove it without a fight I wasn't yet ready to have. The ultimate act of hubris was with the Lakehouse. He stopped pretending. Chloe wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was a resident. Her little red convertible became a permanent fixture in the driveway next to his sedan. He'd call me from the house, and I could hear her laughter in the background. He didn't even try to hide it. It was a power play, a constant, grinding humiliation. He was daring me to object, knowing I felt I had no power to stop him. He was rubbing my face in his victory. He had my husband, my life, and my home. He thought he had won. One afternoon, I received an email. It was a glossy, professionally designed invitation. "Mark Collins and Associates cordially invite you to a celebratory dinner honoring the successful closing of a Henderson acquisition." It listed the date, time, and the name of the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It was the culmination of everything he had been working towards, the deal that was supposed to launch him into the stratosphere. At the bottom was a personal note, typed but clearly from him. Couldn't have done it without my biggest supporter. Later that day, he called. His voice was buoyant, triumphant. "Did you get the invitation? The deal is done, Elle. We closed this morning. We're rich." There was a pause. "I need you there, darling," he said, the false endearment sliding off his tongue. "My beautiful, supportive wife. It wouldn't be a success without you by my side. We need to present a united front for the investors. It's important. A united front." He wanted to use me as a prop one last time. He wanted to parade me in front of his business associates, the perfect accessory to his perfect life, while the woman he was sleeping with was living in my house. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was astounding. I looked at my desk, at the file from Victoria Sterling, at the pristine, notarized deed to 142 Lakeside Drive, with my name and my name alone on it. I looked at the business card for a top real estate agent Victoria had recommended, a woman known for quick, high-profile sales. A plan began to form in my mind, a beautiful, terrible, and exquisitely perfect plan. The final act of our tragic play. And I would be the one directing it. I took a deep breath, composing my voice into a mask of wifely devotion. "Of course, Mark," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As soon as I hung up, I dialed the real estate agent.
Hi, Angela, I said.
It's Lara Collins. We need to move, and we need to move fast. The turning point wasn't a roar. It was a quiet click of a phone call, the first domino in a line that would lead straight to the heart of his empire. The day of the dinner, I moved with a calm that felt almost supernatural. I spent the morning with the real estate agent, Angela. We didn't just sign the listing agreement. We orchestrated a masterpiece. The photos had already been taken, discreetly, the week before. The copy was written. The virtual tour was edited. It was all queued up, ready to go live with the press of a single button on her end, a button she would press the second I sent her a text message. But we went a step further. Angela, at Victoria's suggestion, had quietly reached out to a very specific potential buyer, giving him an exclusive 24-hour heads-up. That buyer was Arthur Harrison, Mark's oldest and most bitter business rival. The hatred between them was legendary in the city's development circles. Giving Harrison the chance to buy Mark's beloved sanctuary out from under him wasn't just a sale, it was a strategic strike. That afternoon, I went to a spa. I had a massage, a facial, a manicure. I was methodically preparing myself for battle, polishing my armor. When I went home to get dressed, I chose my outfit with care. A simple, elegant black dress. Understated, powerful. The kind of dress that says, I don't need to shout to be heard. Mark came home in a whirlwind of self-congratulation, already half-drunk on his own success. He barely glanced at me. You look nice, he said, distracted, as he struggled with his cufflinks. He was electric with nervous energy, pacing the living room, rehearsing his speech under his breath. I was just part of the scenery to him, a necessary piece of the evening's staging. On the drive to the restaurant, he was effusive, talking a mile a minute about the investors, the money, the future. This is just the beginning, Lara, he said, gripping the steering wheel. We're going to be on another level now. Everything is going to change, he was right about that. We arrived at the restaurant. It was all hushed tones, gleaming crystal, and the low murmur of money. The investors were already there, a table of silver-haired men in expensive suits. Mark transformed, becoming the charismatic, confident leader they had invested in. He shook hands, he laughed, he ordered a round of vintage champagne. I smiled, I nodded, I played my part. I was the silent, elegant wife. Invisible, exactly as he wanted me to be. Dinner was served. The food was exquisite, but I couldn't taste it. I was floating, observing the scene from a great height. I watched Mark hold court, his voice booming with confidence as he told an anecdote about the negotiations. He raised his glass for a toast. To the future, he declared. And to the team that made it happen, the men all drank. Then he turned to me, a magnanimous, practiced smile on his face. And especially to my rock, my beautiful wife, Lara. I couldn't have done any of this without her unwavering support. The investors all turned to me, their faces benevolent, and raised their glasses. To Lara, they echoed. I met their eyes one by one. I smiled a small, serene smile and raised my own glass. To my husband, I said, my voice clear and steady. He's finally getting everything he deserves. The double meaning was lost on all of them except me. I took a sip of champagne. Then, under the table, hidden by the crisp white linen, I took out my phone. My thumb hovered over the single text message I had prepared. A single word. Now, I pressed send. I took another slow sip of champagne, my eyes fixed on Mark. I was counting the seconds in my head.
5, 4,
3,
2, 1.
His phone, sitting on the table beside his plate, buzzed. A soft, almost imperceptible vibration. He glanced at it, annoyed at the interruption. His brow furrowed. He picked it up, his thumb swiping across the screen. And then it happened. The freeze. The moment I had been replaying in my mind for weeks. His face, flushed with victory and champagne, drained of all color. The confident smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The fork, laden with that perfect scallop, stopped its journey. His entire body went rigid, as if he'd been struck by lightning. The vibrant, larger-than-life man who had commanded the room just moments before was gone, replaced by a hollow statue. The silence fell like a guillotine. One of the investors, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat. "Mark? Everything all right, son?" Mark didn't respond.
He couldn't.
He was staring at the glowing screen of his phone, at the Zillow notification that read, "Congratulations! Your property at 142 Lakeside Drive is now listed for sale." His eyes, wide and wild, slowly lifted from the phone and met mine across the table. They were filled with a dawning, frantic horror. He knew. In that instant he knew. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp came out. But the show wasn't over. This was just the opening act. Across the table, another phone buzzed. This one belonged to Arthur Harrison, Mark's nemesis. He had been invited by one of the other investors, a silent partner in both their companies. Harrison, a shark in a tailored suit, glanced at his phone. Unlike Mark, he didn't freeze. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He looked up, his cold blue eyes locking first with mine, then swiveling to land on Mark's pale, stunned face. "Well now, this is interesting," Harrison said, his voice a low drawl that cut through the tension. He held up his phone so the table could see the screen. It was an email notification. "An exclusive pre-listing notification from Angela Vance Real Estate," he announced, his grin widening. "It seems a lovely lakefront property just came on the market. An off-market opportunity, in fact." "Alara," he said, turning his gaze to me, a flicker of genuine admiration in his eyes. "Your agent tells me you're a highly motivated seller, and that you're willing to entertain a generous, all-cash offer for a quick close." Mark made a sound, a choked, guttural noise. His world wasn't just collapsing, it was being gleefully dismantled in front of his most important audience by his greatest enemy. He looked from Harrison's triumphant face to my calm one, his mind frantically trying to catch up. He thought this was a negotiation tactic, a desperate plea for attention. He had no idea the war was already over, and he had lost. This was my moment, the culmination of all the pain, the lies, the sleepless nights. I placed my wine glass down with a soft click. I looked directly at Mark, but I spoke to the entire table, my voice even and clear, carrying across the silent room. "Mark has been so dedicated to his work lately," I began, my tone deceptively sweet. "He even moved his project manager, Chloe, into the Lakehouse to help him focus. It's a very demanding project." I let the name hang in the air. The investors shifted uncomfortably. They were businessmen. They understood the implications of a project manager named Chloe living with the CEO. I continued, my voice hardening, the sweetness evaporating. I realized that since he was so invested in his new assets, it was only fair that I start divesting from some of our old ones. The ones that no longer bring me joy. My eyes bore into his. Starting with my Lakehouse. The silence that followed was absolute. The investors stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. They weren't just looking at a marital spat. They were looking at a catastrophic failure of judgment. They were looking at a man who was so arrogant, so reckless, that he had allowed his personal life to publicly implode at the very moment of his greatest professional triumph. They were looking at a man who had been completely and totally outmaneuvered by the quiet, elegant wife they had just hosted. They were looking at a liability. The $100 million Henderson deal, the one they were celebrating, suddenly felt like it was built on a foundation of sand. And Mark knew it. The look on his face wasn't anger anymore. It was the stark, abject terror of a man watching his entire world burn to the ground, and realizing the woman he scorned was the one holding the match. I picked up my purse, placed my napkin on the table, and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen," I said with a small, polite nod. "I have a new life to begin," and I walked out of the restaurant without a single look back.